All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We'll be listening to a great conversation between our two guests today, Giovanna Carrero Contreras, our chair, and also Mary Hernandez Castellanos, one of our AAITE members. They're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, simultaneous or consecutive for an IEP. Now, you may have an answer for that, or you may have your point of view on that, and that's what we want to get to tonight. Start this conversation and be able to see where this conversation leads us and what consensus we can all come to. So without further ado, Giovanna and Mary, the mics are yours.
Hello, hello, welcome, welcome.
Gonna be part of a training?
I do need the power of attorney, maybe not necessarily now. So be aware that you may have your mic unmuted. So we kindly ask that you mute yourself so that we can start, we can kick off the conversation. Mary, welcome. How was your day today?
Thank you very much. Oh, my day was, I'm glad to be here. It was interesting. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And we are glad to welcome everybody else that joined us today for the next hour and a half. We hope that you will really participate to the conversation and be really taking an active role in sharing what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. So to kick us off, Mary prepared a couple of polls for us, right, Mary?
Yeah.
And then, Alex, would you help us start launching the very first one? So you can see on the screen, you should see the first poll. And the first question is, do you use a simultaneous mode for IEPs? Do you use consecutive mode for IEPs? And do you use both modes for IEPs?
I love how the polls are just, I see the votes coming in.
You can see all these
I love the
and,
participation.
fast. Oh my God, the numbers are rising. Awesome. Okay. Alex, can we also rerun these polls a little bit later on?
Yes, definitely. We have about 75% participation, a few more, and then we can end this poll.
Please, please, so the 25% that has not answered yet, go ahead. Let me read what we see at the moment. And at the moment, we see that 54% yes, uses simultaneous for IEPs. And we have that 95% uses consecutive mode for IEPs. And it's interesting to see that 5% does not use consecutive. I would assume that this 5% uses only simultaneous. And do you use both modes for IEPs? And we have a 62% of respondents that say yes, against 38 that only uses one versus the other. Okay, so we also have a second one. And Alex, can you please run the second one? All right. Have you attended a course on simultaneous and or consecutive mode? Have you successfully completed a 40-hour interpreting course? And there is no judgment on however you respond to those questions. There is truly no judgment.
We like data.
Exactly. So thank you for the brave that tell us.
Yes.
And we may have some administrators in the room, and that's why they're not answering our questions, which is okay.
And we'll have a question for you later.
Exactly. And so the 83% of our crowd today responded, yes, we have attended a class, a training on simultaneous or consecutive or both. And 83% responds, yes, we have attended and successfully completed a 40-hour interpreting course. Awesome. So this is what is going to happen during the next hour and a half. Matt and I are going to have a conversation, and we're going to share some interesting thoughts about IEPs and about how to interpret in IEPs. Then we leave you the floor to talk about how you do it. So there is no judgment, or there is no ability to influence what you do or what you think. It's just about understanding what's the current status quo. What do we do, as there is no best practice out there that has really defined how we talk about interpreting in IEPs versus when simultaneous or consecutive come to play. So we go to the breakout rooms, and then we're going to have a discussion, and every breakout rooms is going to have a facilitator. So our facilitators will bring back what you all have shared in the breakout rooms. And then we're going to sum up a little bit of what this conversation is about, and then we will give you the next steps. So, Mary, I have seen you extremely active on LinkedIn on this topic of IEPs. And so I would really like you to help me peel the onion and walk me through what is an IEP for you when you get that call and say, are you available for the IEP on December 3rd, 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock?
All right. Thank you for noticing my activity and nagging on LinkedIn. I like to raise questions, but let's see. So when I get requested for an IEP, by the time that I'm requested for an IEP, I've done plenty where I've studied. I have a glossary or a dictionary that is all about education interpreting and education terminology. So that is one thing that I do go to just to refresher, just to remind myself this is the terminology. And also it's important to note that I am a freelancer. So I don't have the opportunity to debrief or to have a pre-session with the team. And in this case, the team is the parent, psychologist, speech pathologist, case carrier, counselor, general education teacher, special education teacher, sometimes an advocate, sometimes a lawyer. It just all depends on who is part of the team. But when I say the team, that's what I'm talking about. I get to meet the team the day of, that hour of me being their interpreter for 2 or 3 hours. I arrive early enough if I'm not too familiar with the location. I arrive early enough to address the secretary, let me know where I'm going to be. Sometimes they have a conference room, sometimes we go to a classroom. I introduce myself as the interpreter to the parent, the team. Most of the time I get to greet the parent beforehand as they're in the office space and the team is already settled in. I also walk in with my portable equipment for simultaneous interpretation. Prior to having my equipment, I did offer simultaneous interpretation for IEPs, but I'd use the mode Edu-Talk, which they call whisper interpreting. And throughout, I was able to purchase my equipment and I walk with that in. I come in with that. I ask the team if they would like the simultaneous interpretation. Once all parties agree with it, the parent gets a headset with a receiver. I wear my transmitter and I have a steno mic that I use or a lapel mic, whichever I have at the moment. We continue with the IEP in a simultaneous mode. It is also something, the reason one of the polls was launched, we have in my IEPs, I use both modes. I have simultaneous mode and I have consecutive mode. I use simultaneous mode when the team can consist of up to 10, 12 people and as little as 3. When the team is delivering a report, sometimes a psychological report can be very long, and I use simultaneous. If the parent is going to ask a question, I use consecutive. The parent's questions allow for me to take notes, have pauses or their comments. So that allows for my consecutive modes to come in. When there is a longer report being delivered, then we have simultaneous, and I assess to use simultaneous due to the fact that it is a very long report, and interrupting or having a pause can interrupt the information being delivered. That that is how I use the simultaneous and the consecutive mode. I do assess the situation based on the team once I arrive, what is going to be delivered on what modes of interpretation suits that specific IEP in that reserved day or time that I'm assigned as their interpreter. That is, in a nutshell, what happens in once I arrive to the IEPs.
Couple of more questions. And if you have any questions, you can please put it in the chat for Mary. But my first question for you is, you said, do you assess the situation? Is time ever the main reason why you would decide what is the mode of your interpreting?
No.
Okay. And I have another question, because of course I have something to say, but I want to validate what I'm going to say before I say it. And so another thing that sparked my curiosity is you give us the impression to be extremely comfortable in your ability to decide whether you go with consecutive or when you go with consecutive and simultaneous. And we also asked the question in the poll if who took a 40-hour training. Can you talk a little bit about your preparation as an interpreter? Did you take a 40-hour training or any other type of educational background?
Thank you for that question, Giovanna. I believe that as an education interpreter, a lot of my background assists with assessing the situations that I'm placed in when I do simultaneous interpretation or consecutive in IEPs. I have done the 40-hour course with court interpreting, with medical interpreting. I've taken immigration courses. I am certified. And I've also done trainings for simultaneous as well as consecutive and note-taking. And in the process of starting the federal the training for passing that exam. So I believe that in education, because in IEPs, they are med legal and it is a legal document that we're dealing with. I believe that a lot of that training from schooling and continued schooling does allow for me to evaluate and assess when I'm going into an IEP and using the modes that we're using. So that I have had formal training when it comes to the simultaneous mode, consecutive mode, and being an interpreter. There's always space to learn, and I'm always excited to learn some more. So I will continue being in school until I'm 90, if I live that far.
Well, it's okay. You and I be together there. I wait for you when you come up. I'll pick you up. Thank you for answering all these questions. For me, what I found really interesting about what you said, and I thank you everybody that is making either comments or writing, asking questions. Give us the time also to review these questions while you go in the breakout rooms, and then we will also pick up from all these bits and pieces and respond hopefully to all of them. But what I found interesting in what Mary shared is that I think that each one of us can relate to either many of these elements or some of these elements. And I would like to walk us through from a standpoint of a protocol or best practices on what should be done in an IEP. Obviously, what I'm going to say can be applied also to other meetings when we interpret, but for the sake of simplicity, let's just talk about the IEPs. So what I saw Mary doing is, first of all, she has a big phase of preparation, and Mary prepares for the IEPs that she's going to. Her big worry is, well, I never know what I'm going to face because I'm not part of the team. I am a freelancer. But we have also heard that many of the staff working in schools often is kept in the dark as to what they're going to see. You may have more access, but sometimes you don't have much access either. So it's a hit or miss for all of us anyway. So preparation is a big thing. And one thing that I would like to bring up to stir a little bit your thinking about is that IEPs are different from state to state, which means that, Mary, can you tell us about that glossary that you showed us?
Yes, so the glossary, and I did get requested to share. So this is the glossary of educational terminology. And Giovanna brings up a good point when we discussed it. This is from California. So it varies. We've also looked into terms.
Which means that every time we prepare, especially for those of you that now are exposed to more opportunities for interpreting across states, in understanding where the IEP takes place and what district is important. IEPs change from district to district, state to state, school to school. So acronyms can change too, and sometimes we have come across the same term that means different things in different states. But then Mary went on and said, well, in order for me to understand what this IEP holds for me, I get there early so that I can meet the team before I start my interpreting. And I greet the parents. So what we call the introduction, right? We're going to introduce ourselves and we're going to tell, I am here and this is how we're going to do it. Depending on the training that you have taken, all of us know we introduce ourselves as the interpreter, everything will be kept confidential, everything will be repeated to address directly the other party, and that we are going to pause if we have any questions. After the introduction, then Mary mentioned chuchotage. And then she said, but then through the years, I was able to acquire my own portable equipment. One thing that I really enjoyed about what Mary said that brings me up to tell you that we in education work in a profession that is at the intersection of many specializations. Think about it. In an IEP, you always become some of you become a little medical interpreter, and then there is that area that covers legal for all the consents that have to be given, and then the laws, and then the protocols, and then the do's and the don'ts that are in an IEP. So in a way, our skills have to be really, we really need to perform, and our skills have to be up to par, because whether we do consecutive or simultaneous, this is what we rely on to transfer the message. And Mary said something really important, and I hope that you all caught that. Mary said, if the parents talk, I use consecutive and I take notes, and that allows me to take pauses so that I can relay the message from the parents. But when someone else talks, then I switch into simultaneous. Do you know where this is used? Do you know what other specialization, and you can write in the chat, do you know what is the other specialization that has the protocol that Mary has described? And it is legal. It is legal. It is legal. In a courtroom, when the law speaks, it's always simultaneous. When defendants and witnesses talk, that is consecutive. That's a protocol that is very much institutionalized in court settings. So when Mary was telling me this, I'm like, oh my God, this is now she has used that technique in an IEP environment, and now my brain goes, is that right? Is that wrong? Is that possible? Can all of us do it? And what do we all require to do it as well as Mary does? And so all these questions came up to my brain, and I hope that you also are going to have these questions so that you can reflect upon it. Now, someone asked, what is the whispering? What is the chuchotage? Chuchotage is a simultaneous technique, so simultaneous interpreting, but chuchotage basically means whispering, and it means that I am simultaneously interpreting for one of two people, so I'm a little bit behind, they can hear my voice, and I do not interfere with the others present. But if I have 13 people, we heard IEPs, you know better than me, it's up to so many people, then I need equipment, because otherwise when I interpret simultaneously, I am going to cover the voice of the speaker so that 13 people can hear me. So this is, and so you see a lot of chuchotage and whispering when you also see conference interpreters with dignitaries, for example, everybody interpreters for one or two people. Now, moving on, another thing that I really enjoyed about what Mary walked us through is her ability to take the time to say, I assess the situation to understand what fits that meeting, which for me goes back to two elements that an interpreter should always keep in mind, which are critical thinking and communicative autonomy. We need to give everybody the ability to express themselves the way they prefer, they want, they need, communicative autonomy, but we need to have the critical thinking to say, I am the interpreter in the room, and this is how I'm going to perform so that facilitating communications happens. And lastly, I think that, Mary, would you agree with me that we really need to self-evaluate and see where we are in terms of skills, in terms of understanding of protocol, in terms of understanding, I mean, can you tell us what is the maturity or the journey as a professional, as an interpreter that you have gone through, to where you started an IP and where today you are feeling comfortable in some of the decisions that you make?
I do believe that you do have to have a certain level of degree to be able to assess the situation. As when I first started the IEPs, I did walk in like the first IEP, I had no idea what was happening. So for those that are staff in here, I encourage you to just give, an explanation of what it is, because when I got sent to an IEP as a freelancer, there was nothing. So that's why I'm so happy for AAITE and bringing awareness to all this. So when I walked in, I did consecutive, but for the most part, simultaneous was something that I'd use more often. So I immediately saw there was a lot of people in one room, and I'm thinking, how is everyone going to talk all and get their points across walking in with these big old folders? So I immediately asked, I started to go into Chuchotage, and that was, I evaluated that, but based on doing lots of community interpreting prior to and doing an IEP after having years of experience as an interpreter. So yes, I agree with Giovanna. You do need a level of experience to be able to assess the room.
So we would like to give you, we would like you to take as much time as possible to go chat regarding this topic in the breakout rooms. So I am going to make a couple of comments by quickly touching on some of the points that some of you brought up. And one of reports can be site translated as well. Very good. We know that. We're going to have another Edu-Talk on site translation as well. But now we're really focusing on consecutive versus simultaneous. That's what we are kind of limiting the conversation to, and by limiting it, I use a word that is pretty funny for the situation. Also, I am going to put in the chat some of the questions that we would like you to respond. I also would like all of us to think that we all belong to the same profession, to the same organization. And so when we bring up points such as, I think, in my experience, it identifies us as a single person, rather than instead being part of the collective profession. So what we are trying to do here is to learn at what everybody does so that we can actually discuss what is the best way to do this, why we do what we do, stepping away from I think. Because as long as we say I think, we will never be facing the profession in a consistent manner. The same way a doctor does, the same way a teacher does, etc. Yes, everybody has their personality and everything, but we're talking about protocol and we're talking about practices. So I'm going to put in the chat the questions that we are going to discuss in the breakout rooms. We understand that some of you use consecutive, 95% does. 65% uses, 70% uses simultaneous as well. And Alex, before we go into the breakout rooms, can we rerun the polls one more time? And please give the same answer that you gave before. We just want to have accurate data for these Edu-Talk.
Can I answer a question that was sent in the chat where someone else also reiterated that question?
Absolutely. And meanwhile, we can do the polls. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so Fanny asked what sometimes when the reports are being rendered in simultaneous and the parents sometimes stay quiet and they're just getting in all this information, how do I handle that situation? So in this case, the teams, we work together as teams. We're part of the team as the interpreter who is part of that team. The teams that I've encountered constantly ask for clarification. Do you understand? Oh, is that clear? Oh, did you need me to repeat that? I'm going to take a pause so parent can let me know if they understood it. I've come across that often. Then I saw that someone reiterated and said, well, our teams are working on delivering the information differently. And I think that was someone else that replied, Melody. And I think, no, there I go saying, I think it's important protocols for the teams, developing those. When you deliver a report with that much of abundant information, consecutive or simultaneous, there should be space for clarification or asking questions if a team understands and if the parent understands. So that's something that has been facilitated for me as the interpreter. And I've rendered, entiende? This is a parent understanding, you know, it's been facilitated for me. I've been able to work with the team that way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. And I hope that this addresses a couple of questions that we have in the chat. And again, if you copy and paste these questions again, Alex, you can lead us in breakout rooms. Oh, we have the results from the polls first. Okay. So,
They changed.
It changed, but not everybody responded. Now we have 61% participation. So someone must be stepping away from their computers or their phones. Okay.
Everybody make a loud sound. I'm just kidding. No, we don't want acoustic shock.
Okay, stop sharing. And now can you do the second one? Okay, now here we have a higher participation than the one before. And this one is pretty close to what we had before. So we can end the poll and share the results. All right. And with this said, we hope you have a great conversation. Be mindful of our moderators in your room. They will take notes and report back. So let's start with the facilitators reporting on what has been shared in the rooms. And Carol will break the ice with the first group. And you have a minute and a half. Go ahead, Carol. And interpret simultaneously. Fast. You just have 90 seconds.
You get to do the interpreting. I'm the one speaking.
Oh, you're right.
It was very interesting. Most people preferred consecutive. We did have some who used simultaneous on occasion, depending on the circumstances. We talked a lot about how consecutive gives a certain space, which makes it more like a conversation. We also talked briefly about touched on the idea that simultaneous is actually more taxing on the brain. You go into interpreter fatigue more quickly with simultaneous than you do consecutive. We talked about staff preferences, parent preferences, and found that for the most part, people are comfortable with consecutive. And most people are not finding any pushback demanding that they move to simul. But the COVID changed things for a number of people. People who had been doing simultaneous suddenly couldn't anymore because their virtual setting did not allow it. So that forced a change. And I thought that was very interesting.
Thank you, Carol. That was on point. That was on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. So I have 90.
Group
So I
number
have 90
2.
minutes. I have 90 minutes.
I misspoke. It was a seconds, Manar. Let's not.
Okay.
Let's not interpret things differently.
Okay. So group 2, where most of them like the simultaneous more than the consecutive. It depends on the staff, the ability, the training they get. So some of our group member were special education staff been asked to interpret, and that's how they came into it. But most of the people are comfortable with simultaneous. Staff member in school ask for simultaneous. They do have their equipments. They are ready. They go to school ready. Although they set their rules at the beginning of this of the meeting. They explain to the parents, we are going to do this simultaneously. If you feel you need any questions, if you need me to ask the teacher or the staff member anything, please let me know. Other than that, I'm going to keep going. Some prefer to use both modes. So sometimes they can have a conversation between the parents and they can move from simultaneous to consecutive. Some people have to do consecutive because of lack of technology. So they don't have the technology that support simultaneously. They don't have the equipment. They don't, even if they're doing the meeting on Zoom, some of the Zoom accounts doesn't have the interpreting features on. So there's a lot of factors decide or help them to decide what mode they will go with. A lot of staff member will ask for simultaneous because of time. So they will prefer simultaneously to save time if they have other meetings during the day. And there's a great point been raised, and Julieta had a great idea. If we have an IEP goes to 2 hours or more, and you are doing either simultaneously or consecutive, how are you going to ask for a break? So Julieta has her own signs that she created, and she showed it for all of us, that she raised and she told them she need a break or stop, or there's a question or something like that. So she tried to communicate with the staff member without interrupting with whoever is speaking. And I'm done.
Thank you, Manar. And yes, Julieta, I am going to feature you for a second. If we can, Julieta, can you share what your tools are? Because
yes,
I must say,
pin her.
Yes, pin her.
Pin her.
Because at the conference a couple of years ago, Julieta gave me the gift of these tools.
Oh,
so,
great.
Yes. And so she's my hero because she did find an extremely non-intrusive technique to make herself visible when needed. Julieta, the floor is yours. Julieta, you're speaking, we cannot hear you. You need to unmute yourself.
I got it. Sorry, I've been communicating with my family. My dad is sick, so
sorry,
he's
Julieta.
very ill, and so I'm not trying to do many things. But here is
And here I am, Giovanna is putting you on the spot. So sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I took a day off from work yesterday, and I mean today and tomorrow and yesterday, so I can be in the Leo conference. But my dad's situation is very difficult. This is my signs. Can you see them?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So I
excellent.
made up that during the pandemic, and this is the equipment, ARG, from ARG.
Your
This is
signs, you let that show them your
Yeah,
your signs. They're made out
right.
of rulers. Show them how cool that is because it's Edu-Talk, education. They're made out of rulers, guys. That's so amazing. Ugh, it
And
looks
so,
That is
yeah,
wonderful.
chalk.
she has printed
Yeah.
the icons, so she has laminated the icons, so she has glued them on the rulers, and these are the tools that she uses depending on what she wants to communicate. So everybody sees at once. So I would say, Julieta, you are our hero. I've already told you, break time, awesome. These are
Bravo.
very, very cool. Thank you. Slow
Nice,
down.
thanks.
Yep. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
And
And it's my turn.
yes, indeed.
All right, group 3. So we had a very great conversation in group 3. I will summarize as much as I can. First of all, we see value in both modalities. Primarily, it seems that a lot of times once people experience simultaneous, that tends to be the preference. However, there are those that aren't comfortable with simultaneous who don't like hearing two voices at the same time, which is where equipment is very important. And something that was also highlighted several times is that having the skill to do simultaneous is very, very important. And we talked about how we select the modality and who determines it. And at the end of the day, it's the interpreter that determines the modality or the mode, I'm sorry, taking into account any preferences and also taking into account whether or not the mode that we're proposing would interfere with something. And of course, we mentioned a lot of the advantages of simultaneous, including time and many other things, but not necessarily as factors that take into account what mode to implement, but rather taking into account things like what's going to be best suited for the flow of communication, what is going to be the preference of key individuals, especially parents, as they are often in a vulnerable state within the encounter, and it's important that they are able to receive the information. Also, looking at whether or not simultaneous would allow for immediate real-time feedback to be provided, which could assist the communication in specific cases. And of course, consecutive as being an ideal type of modality too, when one, we don't have the skill for simultaneous, we're not as comfortable, we're new to the field. We did have a participant that's brand new and would like to be able to work in consecutive before being forced or having to use the simultaneous technique. We can also switch between the two modes. And there are times where technical issues force us into consecutive. So even if it is the mode that we use, I do want to share that we did have one person who at their school district, they only use simultaneous, but they do have two interpreters, one that goes into one of the languages and the other that goes into the other language. So you have there's no bidirectional. Each interpreter is doing a single direction in interpreting, and it works well within their school district. However, there are still those people that get distracted by having multiple voices. And at times, if it's the preference and it's going to be best for communication, having consecutive may still be chosen. The end.
Thank you, Gabby. Group number 5, who is the facilitator?
Number 4, right? I was 4.
I was 3. I was 3.
So
Yeah,
sorry.
4 is next.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I would say the highlights from my group is that everybody, the majority of people are very comfortable with consecutive. Most of us are. A few of us do prefer simultaneous, but we understand that that preference is just for our own benefit, not necessarily the parents' benefit. But I'm gonna go into that in a little bit in a little bit more. And so we the team at least decided that or said that the consecutive mode, it's a little bit easier. Sometimes you don't have another option. It's a lot simpler, and it's easier to moderate. When you're using consecutive, you have a chance to interrupt the speaker or to interact with them, let them know that they're giving you too much information or that you need repetition, that you need them to repeat any terms or anything like that. It's easier to check in with parents or with your clients to make sure that they are understanding the message. It's also easier to read the room because you have those natural pauses. And so you can see, okay, is my message coming across? Is the parent becoming upset, which is important to check into, right? Because we need to know, as much as you do not want to tailor your rendition to just making the parent comfortable. If the topic is not comfortable, you also don't want to make things worse, right? And then the reasons that we would choose simultaneous will be under special circumstances, especially if the parent is going to have a lot of questions. So you rather give them everything at once and then have them be able to give you the questions. It's faster, it saves time. It helps increase our accuracy. That helps you, for some of us that don't have such a good memory, it's a lot easier to just say everything as is coming into your ears if you're able to block the noise around you and push out your product, push out your rendition. So it helps with your accuracy. It's a bit less complicated if you're doing the sushitash. It helps with time constraints. Many times we have a lot of interpreters that are doing more than one meeting at a time, and they have to go to different sites. So it's a lot easier to manage if you can say, okay, yes, we will be done by 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock. And obviously some of the drawbacks is the lack of chances to check for understanding, although we have one of our interpreters that she does almost exclusively simultaneous, and she does say that she gets a chance to check for understanding often. It might be easier to understand. It might, and some other interpreter mentioned that when she has to do simultaneous, she makes sure to summarize because that's easier for the parents too. For the three, the preference was in general just to do consecutive because of the parents, right? We're trying to give them the most out of it, out of the experience. So it's always easier to have us do consecutive and make sure they have that space, right? Because the parents, we agree that sometimes might be intimidated. They have the specialist talking to them. You have principals, you have lawyers, you have all sorts of people talking to them. And so even if you check in when you're doing simultaneous and they say, oh yeah, you don't have time to actually value or judge if they're being honest or not. And we know how difficult some of those meetings can be, right? So it's a little bit easier to kind of dial down, okay, they need this, the specialist to speak in simpler terms. It's easier to dial it back a little bit if you're able to say and read the body language of the parent. That was basically our conclusion. Simultaneous is a great thing and it helps a lot. Although in that moment it helps a lot, although I did hear a comment that saying it's more tiring in the brain, and I probably agree. It's a lot harder to keep going for an hour versus 30 seconds and rest, 30 seconds and rest.
Thank you, Angelica.
But yeah, thank you.
I'm
At the
sorry.
end, it's hard to use simultaneous and make sure you're accurate or that you're giving the best, you're sending the best message to your client.
Thank you, Angelica. So we have 2 more groups. So
very quickly, pretty much we had a great participation from a parent with a student with an IEP. So that gave us another point of view. She made some really good points that parents feel isolated and overwhelmed with all this information. So consecutive is usually better for a parent. Also, parents feel that they're entering to an adversarial arena, so they should feel welcomed. And this is what simultaneous does. When it's consecutive, it's more of like a dialogue. And simultaneous is more not beneficial for parents, convenient for staff because it's faster, and it feels like it's a hierarchical setting for the parents, and they don't feel part of the team. And in general, we thought that the best practice should be that the interpreter is the one who determines the mode of interpretation.
thank you.
Summary.
Thank you. Next and last group.
Okay, my group was unique because they are from different states, was different. Some of them are staff already on the district, and some of them are freelances. Also, the experience they showed, some of them has experience over 35 years, like Holly, and we have also Clarita, who was just hired 2 or 3 months ago. And she said that all of them, they agree with all what have been said in all groups, is that they prefer the simultaneous mode, but during the IEP, for the sake of the parents to understand everything, they prefer the consecutive. And for the question of who, if they have ever seen a staff or professional ask for a certain mode, they all agreed that the staff in the schools, they don't understand the differences between the modes. Even after the training, they expressed that they hear it from the right ear and get it out from the left ear. And they also mentioned that whenever they change the mode of interpretation, if they are having side talk, and they change from consecutive to simultaneous, they give them the look as if they are shocked. What are you doing? Why you changed? Why you speaking? Why we are speaking? Even after they mention and prepare the pre-station, their rules and the modes that they are gonna use in the interpretation, but they have to change from consecutive to simultaneous depending on the flow of the meeting and depending on the situation and what's going on. So the interpreter is the one who's choosing which mode going better for the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Fat. So to wrap it up, because we're just 2 minutes away, Mary, would you like to say a few words before I say mine?
It was wonderful to hear all the feedback. It was wonderful to hear, and also music to my ears to hearing how both modes were used, because I have used both modes, and how the interpreter has determined on how both modes are used, and that shows experience on that. I was very curious, as the parent that did speak, was the parent just Spanish speaking or English speaking? I would really be interested in hearing a parent's perspective on the one that just is speaking a Spanish speaker, because the feedback and experience has been very positive with parents on hearing that, and there is space for clarification when those reports are being rendered. But that was something that I was very curious. And I think that's another one, Giovanna, trying to go to advocate groups and get a pull on the parents. I mean, we might just change that.
My conclusion is that this was exactly the type of conversations that we needed. So I apologize. Maybe we're going to go 1 or 2 minutes over. So if you have a timeline and you need to leave, I thank you for being here with us. If you want to hear the last couple of minutes, this is what I would like to say. There are pros and cons for everything. And so there are pros and cons for consec, there are pros and cons for simultaneous. However, there are 3 stakeholders at a minimum in these IEPs. Those are the parents, those are the providers of services, and then the interpreter. Everybody carries a part of the responsibility. And I would love that spoken languages would be that area where we can conduct some research, because truth to be told, we don't know if the parents get everything when it's done with simultaneous. In this room, there is primarily Spanish. There are a few other languages represented, but when you talk about interpreting and when you talk about a profession, you need to talk about the profession. And so we need to work through practices that work across for everybody. There is also another thing that are things that we should think of, check for understanding. What does that mean? It just came into, and I say this to conclude, to give some food for thought. I think that we need more of this to work on our best practices. But it came to my inbox this morning, the Journal of Interpretation from 2020 that was released by the RID, the Registry for the Interpreters for the Deaf. And the title of the article that I was provided is Educational Interpreters and the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And that's what I want to conclude and want you to think of. Kruger and Dunning found the least skilled individuals significantly overestimate their performance, which means that sometimes when we feel very strong about things, that it's not necessarily the truth. They run a research, they did a study on the performance of the interpreters, and the findings indicated that interpreters experience a Dunning-Kruger effect. So you can search Dunning-Kruger effect, which meant that the least skilled interpreters overestimate their interpreting skills, whereas better interpreters underestimate their interpreting skills. The reason why I'm bringing this up is to say these conversations is helpful to everybody to try to think of what is the best practices for the profession, not necessarily for what we think. And considering the fact that one, we don't have a way to measure how effective we are, and two, we don't have a way to measure how the parents feel by receiving all this information. And so the Kruger effect that someone has already put in, this is the name. So I thank everybody because the conversations were very, very rich. I don't think there is a right or wrong, but there is a lot of room for conversation on these topics, and more to come. I hope that you can participate in more. We need more data on this. Thank you so very much. You have a wonderful evening. And Alex, I let you finish it up as you are the magician of our Ed Talks.
Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you, Mary. We appreciate how you guys led the conversation. And I think at the end of the day, the reason why we're all here and the reason why many of our colleagues are part of AAITE is because we care about the ultimate goal, which is language access, right? That is the goal, language access, justice for the parents and the students that we are serving in education. So whatever we can do to ultimately get to that goal is what's going to make us be recognized as professionals. So the fact that you're all here already indicates that you're interested in learning, receiving training, and for that we thank you. So with that in mind, thank you everybody for being here tonight. In January there won't be an Edu-Talk due to the calendar and the end of the year. So we're going to take a little break, but we'll be back in February. We'll soon be posting the topic for our February Edu-Talk. And then in March, we will have our next Edu workshop. So stay tuned for those announcements. Thank you everybody for being here. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@aaite.org. Have a good evening. Thank you, everybody.